They say that blood is thicker than water, but 8 years ago, my blood left me standing in an empty church in a white dress that felt more like a shroud than a celebration. For nearly a decade, my phone had been a graveyard of blocked numbers and unanswered prayers, a silent testament to the day my family decided I wasn't worth the price of a wedding invitation. But then, on a Tuesday that smelled of rain and unwashed regret, the silence didn't just break, it shattered. I was standing in the kitchen of the home I built from nothing, pouring a cup of coffee and looking out at the Seattle skyline when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite ring, it was the frantic, entitled pounding of people who believe they own the ground you stand on. When I opened the door, the air left my lungs. There they were. My mother, Eleanor, looking older but still wearing that same mask of rehearsed disappointment, and my sister, Becca, clutching a designer handbag like a shield. They didn't lead with, "I'm sorry." They didn't ask how I was or why I had disappeared from their lives or even if I was happy. They stood there, dripping rainwater onto my hardwood floor, and my mother handed me a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a letter of reconciliation, it was a list of debts, mortgages, and wedding expenses for the sister who had toasted my absence 8 years ago. "Clara," my mother said, her voice as sharp as winter frost, "we need to talk about your responsibilities to this family. You've done well for yourself, and it's time you settled the score." I looked at the paper, then at the two women who had erased me from every family photo, every holiday dinner, and every memory. They thought I was the same girl they left behind. They thought I was still hungry for their approval. What they didn't know was that while they were busy forgetting me, I was busy keeping receipts. I wasn't just an architect of buildings anymore. I was the architect of a truth they were about to find very, very uncomfortable. My name is Clara Miller. I am 32 years old, and for the first 24 years of my life, I lived in a house where love was a currency I could never afford. We lived in a charming two-story colonial in a suburb of Savannah, Georgia, the kind of house that looks perfect on a Christmas card but feels like a cage if you're the wrong bird. In the Miller household, roles were assigned before we could even walk. My older sister, Becca, was the crown jewel. She was the one who photographed well, the one who won the pageants, the one whose every minor achievement was celebrated with a three-course dinner and a framed certificate on the living room wall. And then there was me. I was the background. I was the one who cleared the table, the one who took the photos, the one whose presence was only noted when something needed to be cleaned or when a seat needed to be filled for the sake of symmetry. My mother, Eleanor, was the director of this performance. She didn't just raise us, she curated us. If you looked at the 14 framed photos above our sofa, Becca was in every single one, glowing under the studio lights. I appeared in exactly two. In the first, I was partially obscured by a Christmas tree. In the second, my face was half cut by the edge of the frame. My mother never bothered to fix it. "It's a candid, Clara," she'd say, with that dismissive tilt of her chin. "It captures the mood." I grew up understanding that my value was negotiable, while Becca's was absolute. When I brought home straight A's, my mother would nod and ask if I'd finished the laundry. When Becca barely passed a math quiz, my father would spend $300 on a tutor because a girl like Becca shouldn't have to worry about numbers. Welcome to our community, where we dive deep into the stories that define us, the moments of betrayal, the hidden truths, and the ultimate triumphs. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own home, or if you've been the one your family decided was expendable, this story is for you. Before we go further, please take a moment to subscribe and join our family here. Your support helps us tell these stories, and I read every single one of your comments about your own journeys. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was your label growing up? By the time I was 22, I had learned to build my world in the margins. I studied architecture at the State University on a scholarship they didn't help me earn. I worked 2 jobs to pay for the drafting supplies they wouldn't buy me. I was building a foundation, brick by brick, while they were busy polishing Becca's pedestal. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I became successful enough, they would finally look at me and see a daughter instead of a shadow. But then I met Ethan Reed, and for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and didn't see a shadow at all. They saw a masterpiece. And that was when my family decided that if they couldn't control my light, they would try to blow it out entirely. I met Ethan Reed on the day when my world felt like it was made of gray paper. I was working at a small architectural firm in downtown Savannah, tucked away in an office that felt more like a closet, while Becca was at home, probably having her third pre-birthday shopping spree. Ethan was a structural engineer, sent to consult on a historic preservation project I was leading. He didn't walk into the room with the arrogance of the men my mother usually paraded in front of Becca, men with trust funds and surnames that belonged on bank buildings. Ethan walked in wearing a faded flannel shirt, carrying a worn leather satchel, and holding a cup of coffee that he actually offered to share when he saw how tired I looked. For the first time in my life, someone didn't look through me to see the furniture. He looked at my blueprints, then he looked at me, and he said, "You didn't just design a building, Clara. You designed a home for people's stories. That's rare." Ethan was from a town in Oregon that didn't even have a stoplight. His father had been a carpenter, a man who taught him that a house is only as strong as the integrity of the wood it's built from. He wasn't rich, but he was solid. He was the kind of person who remembered how you liked your tea and noticed when your voice shook even if you were smiling. When I finally brought him home for dinner, the air in our colonial house turned into ice. My mother, Eleanor, sat at the head of the table like a judge at a sentencing. She didn't ask Ethan about his work or his dreams. She asked him where his family spent their summers. When he said his father didn't believe in vacations because the wood didn't take days off, my mother's fork hit the plate with a sharp metallic clink. "A carpenter's son," she said, the words dripping with a condescending sweetness that was more poisonous than any insult. "How quaint. I suppose you're looking to build something more substantial for yourself, aren't you?" Becca laughed, that high-pitched, rehearsed giggle she used to signal that someone was beneath us. "Clara always did have a soft spot for the background characters, didn't you, sis? First it was the strays at the shelter, and now this." Ethan's hand found mine under the table. His grip was warm and steady, a silent anchor in a room of sharks. "I'm not looking to build something substantial," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "I've already found it. It's sitting right next to me." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the breath out of me. My father didn't look up from his steak. He had spent 30 years letting my mother curate his life, and he wasn't about to start standing up for his background daughter now. A week later, the ultimatum came. My mother called me into the living room, the room with the 14 photos that didn't include me. She sat me down and told me that Ethan Reed was a glitch in the family brand. She told me that if I continued this little rebellion, I would be forfeiting more than just my place at the table. "You have a choice, Clara," she said, her chin tilted at that familiar, dismissive angle. "You can marry that man and become a ghost to us, or you can end this now and stay a Miller. We don't have room for people who don't contribute to the family's prestige. If you walk down that aisle with him, you walk away from everything we've ever given you." What she didn't realize was that they hadn't given me anything but a label. They hadn't given me love, they'd given me a checklist, and Ethan was the only person who had ever looked at the girl behind the checklist and told her she was enough. "Then I'll be a ghost," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it was the strongest thing I had ever said in that house. I stood up and walked out, leaving the 14 photos behind. I thought the worst was over. I thought by making my choice, I had already paid the price. I was wrong. The real bill hadn't even arrived yet. June 14th. The humidity in Savannah was so thick it felt like a physical weight, pressing down on the white lace of my dress. I was 24 years old, standing in the small vestry of a historic chapel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the grand cathedral my mother had always envisioned for Becca, but it was beautiful. It had the kind of old arched windows that Ethan and I both loved, the kind that let the light in even on a cloudy day. I checked my phone for the 100th time. No messages, no good luck, no "we're on our way." My father's phone went straight to voicemail. Becca had blocked me on everything 3 days ago. My mother's number was a dead end. "They'll come," I whispered to my reflection in the mirror. I had spent my whole life being the one who moved back to make room for them. I had spent my life clearing their plates and taking their photos. Surely, on this one day, they would show up for me. Surely, they wouldn't let their pride outweigh their own daughter's heart. Ethan's family was already there. His mother, a kind woman with calloused hands and a heart of gold, had flown in from Oregon. She had pinned a sprig of lavender in my hair and told me I looked like a dream. His friends were filling the pews on the left side of the church, laughing and sharing stories. But the right side, my side, was a graveyard of empty seats. The organ music started. The doors opened. I stood at the back of the aisle, my bouquet trembling in my hands. I looked down the long stretch of the church. Ethan was standing at the altar, looking at me with so much love it made my chest ache. But the pews on the right were empty. Not a single person. Not an aunt, not a cousin, not a parent. I walked down that aisle alone. No father to walk me, no sister to stand behind me as my maid of honor. Every step felt like walking through deep water. I could hear the whispers of the guests on Ethan's side. I could feel the pity in their eyes, and it burned worse than the heat. We said our vows. Ethan's voice was like a shield, protecting me from the silence of the empty seats. He said, "I choose you," and I knew he meant he was choosing the girl the Miller family had thrown away. We were pronounced husband and wife, and as we walked back up the aisle, the emptiness of the right side was all I could see. It wasn't just empty chairs, it was a loud, screaming statement. "You do not belong to us." The reception was small, held at a local cafe. Ethan's mother made a toast that brought everyone to tears, but my heart was still in that empty church. I went to the restroom to splash some water on my face, and that's when I saw it. I had unblocked Becca's Instagram for just a second, a moment of weakness, hoping to see a photo of them on their way to me. What I saw instead was a knife to the gut. Becca had posted a photo an hour ago. It was the whole family, my mother, my father, Becca, and 3 of our cousins. They were at The Grill, the most expensive steakhouse in Savannah. They were all holding glasses of champagne, laughing, their faces glowing under the warm restaurant lights. The caption read, "Sunday family dinner with the real ones. So much peace when you finally cut out the noise. Hashtag family first, hashtag Miller legacy, hashtag better off." I sat on the floor of that bathroom in my $160 consignment shop wedding dress, and I didn't cry. The tears were gone. Something else was taking their place. It was a cold, hard clarity. I realized then that my mother was right about one thing. I was a ghost to them. But what she didn't know was that ghosts have a way of remembering everything. I didn't tell Ethan about the photo. I didn't want to ruin our night. But as we drove away from Savannah that evening, heading towards our new life in Seattle with nothing but 2 suitcases and each other, I looked in the rearview mirror and made a promise. I would build a life so big, so strong, and so full of light that their absence would be nothing but a tiny, dark speck in my past. And if they ever tried to step back into that light, they would find that the background daughter had built a wall they couldn't climb. Before we move into the next 8 years of my life, the years where I stopped being a victim and started being an architect of my own empire, take a moment to think about your own journey. Have you ever been left behind on a day when you needed your people the most? Like this story if you've ever had to find your own strength. And don't forget to subscribe. Your support means the world to us as we share these real human moments. Leaving Savannah wasn't a clean break, it was an amputation. We drove across the country in a beat-up sedan that smelled like old coffee and hope, with the heavy humidity of Georgia slowly being replaced by the crisp, biting air of the Pacific Northwest. Seattle didn't welcome us with open arms. It welcomed us with a relentless, gray drizzle that matched the cold clarity in my heart. The first 2 years were survival in its purest form. We lived in a studio apartment in a part of the city where the streetlights hummed too loud and the radiator clanked all night like a restless ghost. Ethan worked 12-hour shifts on construction sites, coming home with sawdust in his hair and hands so raw he could barely hold a fork. I worked as a junior intern at a historic preservation firm during the day, and at night I pulled shifts at a diner near the waterfront. I'd stand there at 3 a.m., smelling like old grease and floor wax, pouring coffee for truckers who didn't know that the girl serving them eggs was dreaming of restoring the very bones of the city. Every tip I earned went into a shoebox. Every dollar Ethan saved went into our foundation fund. We weren't just saving for a house, we were saving for a future that didn't require anyone's permission to exist. But while I was building my career, I was also building something else. I had started carrying a small yellow Kodak camera, the disposable kind. Since no one was there to take my picture, I became my own witness. I took photos of the day we signed our first lease. I took a photo of my first drafting table, a piece of plywood balanced on two sawn-off chairs. I took a photo of the first time my name appeared on a set of blueprints. I kept them all in a box, a silent record of a life being lived in the margins. And then there was the silence from Georgia. I didn't stop trying at first. I was still that girl in the stained yellow dress hoping for a crumb of approval. For the first 3 years, I sent cards. I sent a card for my mother's birthday, one for my father's, and a Christmas card every December. I sent an announcement when we finally bought our first modest home, a fixer-upper with a leaky basement and a backyard full of weeds. 11 days later, the envelopes would appear in my mailbox. They were always stamped in a violent, cold shade of red, return to sender. Sometimes the glue on the flap was creased, as if someone had opened it, looked at the contents, looked at the photos of the life I was building, and then carefully resealed it before sending it back into the void. That's when I bought the navy binder. It was a heavy 3-ring binder with clear plastic sleeves. I didn't keep it out of spite, I kept it because I am an architect, and architects do not throw away documentation. I filed every returned card. I filed the screenshot of the Facebook post where my sister, Becca, posted a photo of the family at a summer barbecue, captioned, "Finally, the perfect family of 4." I filed the voicemail transcripts of the 3 times I had tried to call my father, only to be met with a dial tone or his voice saying, "Your mother needs more time." Tab 1, year 1. Tab 2, year 2. It became a record of my exclusion. Every time they told the world I was a ghost or a mistake, I filed the receipt. Professionally, the tide began to turn when I was 28. I led a project to restore a 1920s Carnegie Library in a small town outside of Seattle. The town council wanted to tear it down, but I saw the bones. I saw the craftsmanship that everyone else had given up on. I worked pro bono for the first 6 months, sleeping in my car because I couldn't afford the gas for the commute. When the doors finally opened, the town voted to name the reading room after me. By 31, I had my own studio. We specialized in the bones of the city: churches, post offices, the structures that hold a community together. National journals started calling. American Preservation magazine wanted me for a cover story. My net worth was no longer measured in tips. It was measured in contracts and successful IPO filings. I had built an empire from the silence they gave me. I was the CFO of my own life, and the balance sheet was finally in the green. I had a husband who looked at me like I was the center of the universe, and a home that felt like a sanctuary. I thought I was safe. I thought the 8 years of silence meant the bill was paid. But people like Eleanor Miller don't let a debt go unpaid when they realize the debtor has found a gold mine. They don't miss you because they love you. They miss you because they've run out of people to pay for their lifestyle. As you follow this journey of rebuilding and resilience, it's a reminder that your worth was never determined by the people who refuse to see you. If this part of the story resonates with you, if you've ever had to become your own witness, hit that like button and subscribe to our community. We are more than just stories here. We are a support system for anyone who has been told they were invisible. Tell me in the comments, what did you build when the world told you no? The silence was about to end, and the noise that followed was more calculated than any blueprint I had ever drawn. The doorbell rang on 10:14 on a Tuesday morning. I remember the exact time because I was in my home office, reviewing a vendor contract for a new project in Austin. The sun was hitting the rain-washed windows of our Seattle Craftsman house, and the world felt quiet, peaceful. When I opened the door, the peace didn't just leave, it evaporated. There stood my mother, Eleanor, and my sister, Becca. My mother was wearing a beige cardigan, the color of feigned humility, and clutching a small, worn suitcase. Becca stood behind her, wearing a designer jacket and holding a phone that she was already using to scan the interior of my hallway. Clara, my mother said. Her voice didn't have the warmth of a mother who had found her long-lost daughter. It had the clipped, professional cadence of a collector. Mom, Becca, I said. My voice was level. 8 years of therapy and success had given me a voice that no longer shook when they entered the room. What are you doing here? They didn't ask to come in. They pushed past me, their eyes cataloging the hardwood floors, the high ceilings, and the expensive art on the walls. I led them to the kitchen, the room where truth lives in my house. They didn't lead with, "I'm sorry." They didn't lead with, "We missed you." They sat at my marble island, and my mother reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was written in blue ink, neat bullet points in the handwriting she used to use for church potluck lists. "We've seen the magazines, Clara," Becca said, her eyes flitting toward the espresso machine. "You've done well for yourself, better than anyone expected for someone like you." My mother unfolded the paper. "We need to talk about the family's future," she said, sliding the list across the marble toward me. I didn't pick it up, I just looked at it. Retirement fund for your father and me, $500,000. Becca's wedding and honeymoon, $200,000. Mortgage payoff for the Savannah house, $180,000. Monthly support for family maintenance, $3,000. The total was just shy of $1 million. It wasn't a request for help, it was an invoice for the life they had excluded me from. "This is what families do, Clara," my mother said, her chin tilting at that old familiar angle. "Your father and I sacrificed everything to give you a foundation. We fed you, we clothed you, we sent you to school. Now that you've struck gold, it's time you settled the score." "Sacrificed?" I repeated. The word felt bitter in my mouth. "You gave me Becca's hand-me-downs. You gave me 3 photos on a wall of 14. You gave me an empty church on my wedding day." "We were upset, Clara," Becca cut in, her voice sounding practiced. "People say things when they're emotional, but we're past that now. We're moving forward as a family, and as a family, we invest in each other." "A family investment," I said. I looked at the list of demands. They had tracked my success, monitored my company's growth, and waited until the numbers were high enough to make the trip worth it. They hadn't come for the girl, they had come for the bank account. My mother leaned forward, her eyes dampening in that theatrical way she had perfected years ago. "We've had a hard time, honey. Your father's health, the plant closing. We just need a little bit of the abundance you've been blessed with. It's only fair." Fair. The most dangerous word in the English language when spoken by someone who has never been just. "I'm a numbers person, Mom," I said, standing up, "and the math on this doesn't add up. You brought a list of what you want, but you forgot that for 8 years I've been keeping a list of what you did." I walked toward my office. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I knew exactly where it was. Bottom drawer, under the tax folders, behind the insurance documents. The navy binder was waiting. I walked into my home office, the room that was a testament to every late night, every stressful deadline, and every brick I had laid in the foundation of my own life. I opened the bottom drawer of my mahogany desk. There it was, the navy binder. It was heavy, its spine reinforced with tape because I had added so much evidence over the last 8 years. I didn't feel angry as I gripped it. I felt a cold, professional clarity. I was an architect. I dealt in facts, in structures, and in things that could stand the test of time. Their lies were a shaky scaffolding, and I was about to pull the pin. I walked back into the kitchen. The metal rings of the binder made a sharp click-clack sound as I set it down on the marble island, right next to the $925,000 invoice my mother had so carefully prepared. "What is that, Clara?" Becca asked, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the thick stack of plastic-sleeved pages. "We don't have all day for scrapbooks. We need to talk about the wire transfer. The lawyer in Savannah says we only have 48 hours before the bank starts the foreclosure process on Mom's house." "This isn't a scrapbook, Becca," I said, my voice as steady as a granite pillar. "You brought a list of what you want. I brought a record of what you did. Since we're talking about settling scores and family responsibilities, let's look at the balance sheet." I flipped open the binder to tab 1. Year 1. June 14th, 8 years ago, I began, pulling out a white envelope with a red stamp. Item 1, a wedding photo. I sent it to you a week after the ceremony, hoping that seeing our happiness would soften your hearts. It came back 11 days later, unopened, stamped return to sender. You didn't even want to see the face of the man I loved. My mother shifted in her seat. Clara, we were hurt. You chose him over us. We had a right to our feelings. And I had a right to a family. I flipped to tab 3. Year 3. I sent an announcement when I was promoted to senior architect. I thought you'd be proud. Item 7, the card was returned, but the envelope was creased. Someone, I'm guessing you, Mom, opened it, saw the success I was having, and then resealed it with clear tape before sending it back. You wanted to know if I was doing well, but you didn't want to admit it. Becca rolled her eyes. So you're keeping old mail? That's pathetic, Clara. We're talking about real-world problems. Becca's wedding is in 3 months, and if we don't have the deposit for the venue— Becca's wedding, I interrupted, flipping to the middle of the binder. Tab 8. Last year, I saw the photos of your engagement party on Instagram, Becca. I wasn't invited, of course, but I did get a text from a mutual friend. Here it is, item 22. I read the screenshot aloud. Becca said it's so much easier having a wedding without the background noise. Clara would just make it about herself anyway. You called me noise, Becca. While I was building a company that could pay for your entire life, you were calling me noise. The room went silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to stop. My mother's theatrical tears were starting to form, the well-rehearsed moisture she used to control my father for 30 years. We didn't mean it like that, honey. We were trying to move on. Move on, I laughed, a short, sharp sound that had no humor in it. You didn't move on, you moved out. You erased me from the narrative until the narrative started looking profitable. I'm a CFO, Mom. I know how to read a market. You didn't come here for me. You came here because Forbes mentioned our IPO. You came here because you saw the Tesla in the driveway and the art on the walls. I pulled out the final item in the binder, the one that hurt the most. 2 years ago, when our daughter, Maya, was born, I sent the birth announcement. I thought surely a grandchild would be the bridge. Item 29, the announcement came back with a note on the back of the envelope in your handwriting, Mom. It said, "She's not one of us. Don't send more." My mother's face went pale. The return to sender stamps were one thing, but seeing her own words, her own rejection of an innocent child, was a mirror she wasn't prepared to look at. You told me that Ethan was a glitch in the family brand. You told me that if I walked down that aisle, I'd be walking away from everything you ever gave me. Well, I walked, and Ethan and I built our own brand, a brand based on loyalty, on hard work, and on showing up when the pews are empty. Your brand is built on invoices and exclusion. I picked up her $925,000 list and held it between 2 fingers. You want $500,000 for a retirement fund? You want $200,000 for Becca's wedding? You want me to pay for the lifestyle of the people who toasted my absence? We are your blood, my mother shouted, her voice finally losing its polite veneer. After everything I sacrificed to raise you, the food, the clothes, the roof over your head, you owe us. Raising a child isn't a debt you get to collect on interest once they become successful, Mom. It's a choice you made. And the roof you gave me was the same roof you used to hide me from the world. You didn't give me a life, you gave me a role in your play, but I've walked off the stage. I slowly tore her list of demands in half, then in quarters. The pieces of paper fluttered onto the marble island like confetti at a party no one wanted to attend. The math is settled. The debt is canceled. Because according to your own records, I don't exist in this family, and a ghost doesn't have a checkbook. Before we reach the final resolution of this story, the moment where I finally close the door on the past and embrace the family I chose, I want to thank you for being part of this journey. If you've ever had to stand your ground against people who only see your value when it's convenient for them, hit that like button. It tells me that I'm not alone in this. And if you haven't yet, join our community by subscribing. We're building something strong here, one story at a time. What would you do if you were holding that binder? Tell me in the comments. I looked at my mother and sister. They weren't family. They were strangers who shared my DNA and an appetite for my bank account. And for the first time in 32 years, I wasn't afraid of the silence they were about to leave behind. The silence that followed the closing of the binder was the loudest thing I had ever heard. My mother's mouth worked soundlessly like a fish out of water, while Becca stared at the torn pieces of her invoice as if she could somehow wish them back into a whole document. The entitlement that had brought them to Seattle was starting to curdle into something else, a realization that the shadow daughter was no longer someone they could manipulate with a sigh or a staged tear. "Clara," my mother finally whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and genuine shock. "You can't be serious. We are your blood. After everything I sacrificed to raise you, after the years I spent making sure you had a roof over your head, this is how you repay the woman who gave you life?" I looked at her, and for the first time in 32 years, I didn't feel the need to apologize for existing. Raising a child isn't a loan you get to collect on interest once they become successful, Mom. It's a choice you made, and the roof you gave me was the same roof you used to hide me from the world. You didn't give me a life, you gave me a role in your play, but I've walked off the stage. Becca stepped forward, her designer heels clicking sharply on the tile. "You're being selfish, Clara. You have millions. You live in this house while Dad is struggling and my wedding is falling apart. How can you live with yourself knowing you could solve all our problems with a single check?" I solve problems for people who matter to me, Becca. The check I wrote on my wedding day, the one for the catering and the flowers for the empty pews, that was the last check I will ever write for this family. You didn't come here to be a sister. You came here to be a debt collector. And according to my records, the account is closed. "You'll regret this," my mother said, standing up and grabbing her suitcase. Her face had hardened into the mask I remembered from my childhood, the one she wore when she was about to erase someone from a photo. "You're no daughter of mine." "I stopped being your daughter 8 years ago, Eleanor," I said, using her name for the first time. "I'm an architect now. I build things that last, and I've built a life that doesn't have a single room for you in it." I walked them to the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't need to. I simply held it open and watched them walk out into the gray Seattle drizzle. They looked smaller than I remembered, less powerful. They weren't the giants who loomed over my childhood. They were just two people who traded their daughter's heart for a chance at their bank account. I closed the door, and the click of the lock felt like the final period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. I stood in the hallway for a long time after they left. The house was quiet again, the air no longer heavy with their demands. I walked over to the window and watched their taxi pull away into the mist of the Pacific Northwest. For 32 years, I had defined myself by their absence, by the empty pews, and by the photos I wasn't in. But as I stood there, I realized that the background had finally become the whole picture. Ethan walked into the kitchen then. He didn't ask what happened. He saw the torn paper on the counter and the navy binder still open to the page of my wedding photo. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just walked up behind me, put his hands on my shoulders, and pulled me back against him. "You okay?" I asked. "I'm more than okay," I said, turning in his arms. "I'm free." Family isn't a matter of DNA or a shared last name. It isn't the people who show up only when your net worth makes the news, or the people who expect you to pay a lifetime of exclusion with $1 million check. Real family is the person who holds your hand in an empty church. It's the person who believes in your blueprints when you're living in a studio apartment with nothing but a shoebox of dreams. It's the people who choose you every single day, not because of what you have, but because of who you are. I looked at the navy binder one last time. I didn't throw it away. I put it back in the bottom drawer of my desk, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. It's the record of a woman who was told she was a shadow and decided to become a sun. It's the proof that you can take the bricks of betrayal and use them to build a fortress of peace. Thank you for walking through this journey with me. This story isn't just about a wedding or an inheritance, it's about the moment you realize your worth is non-negotiable. If you've ever had to close the door on people who refuse to see your light, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below. I read every single one of them. And if this story reminded you that you are the architect of your own happiness, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community. We're building something strong here, one story at a time. My name is Clara Miller, and I am finally, truly home.